Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Whiteside, I'm particularly interested in your description of the length of time it took to get certified to monitor the platforms in the Gulf. As you say here, well offshore, no population, no VFR, and obviously, a critical mission that saves a tremendous amount of money, and it's also, for public safety. So you're saying that there's still a question whether you can do this under Part 107 or under the waiver authority with the 333? Why is there still a question?
That is correct. The challenge that we face in a lot of these regulations is that there's no clear defined answer. When you talk to the FAA, you often get an interpretation of a rule, and you don't get a hard set requirement or a defined answer. So with regard specifically to offshore, we're operating outside the ADIZ, which is the Air Defense Identification Zone. And there is some differences depending upon who you speak with within the FAA about who has the controlling authority in that airspace and whether or not the rule that you're operating under is the standard federal rules or under the new exemption. And that's what the problem that we face oftentimes within the space that we're operating. It's not that the people that we're dealing with within the FAA aren't knowledgeable or they're not caring or they're pretty attentive when you ask a question. But much of what we do relies on interpretation. And that's where the delays often come in the rulemaking or in trying to get the approvals, is that you're dealing with a construct that happens oftentimes behind closed doors within the lawyers and the legal realms of the FAA. Sure. And there's not a defined process by which answers can be driven. And
okay, then Mr. Gibson, can you address how can we make that process work better? I mean, it shouldn't take that long. Yes, sir.
We endeavor to improve on things. I think he touched on a key point here, and I'm not familiar with the specifics of that case, but we're breaking new ground. I call this the most fundamental change in aviation in our lifetimes, and so many of these don't map directly to what pre-existed with our traditional aviation. So some of them take quite a bit of thought to make sure, even though you're out over the ocean, of course you have helo traffic out there, you have the safety of the platform itself, but I can take that for additional question if need be, sir.
Yeah, it just seems to me we ought to be able to categorically establish some of these things. Like, okay, if we've got certified for one platform now, it should be a much more routine process in the future for either his company or another certified operator to do these sorts of things. I mean, we need to have some standardization here. I mean, I know it's an issue of first impression, but once you've dealt with it once, then it's no longer an issue of first impression, and we ought to be able to move more quickly. And if you need direction from Congress or you think you lack authority, then tell us, because we'd like to fix that. Yes. I'd like to go to Mr. Fayard, because obviously you're dealing with an issue that's becoming more and more critical to many communities. And I'm curious about this 18 months to get one aircraft onto a certificate. Why would it take that long?
Well, that's more of a kind of what you have to plan for, if you will. And the certification process itself is relatively straightforwardly laid out, saying these are the steps you need to do. The problem that we have, and it ties back into the access to capital and funds, is the uncertainty. There are gates to walk through, but that doesn't mean it's going to happen in 18 months. And so when you go to an investor group and say, listen, we're starting this aviation business, we're going to get our own certification, you can't tell them reliably to say, well, it could be a year, it could be 2 years, it could be 3 years, because there's no, even if you do all the correct things on our side, and I'm not saying that's always the case, but if you go forth in that endeavor, there is no way to be able to tell or plan that you will be able to receive a certification to operate in some period of time. It's all best guess. And that's very difficult, obviously, on the financing side. That's very difficult on the operational side. It's very frustrating to our cities and partners saying, well, we can get there when we can get there. It's very difficult to kind of forecast your business as well. So if you have an enterprising group that says, we're going to start another GLOW, they could not reliably tell you, if they're lying, that, yes, we're going to have our own certification in 18 months, and we'll be flying 18 months plus a day. It's not. But
the steps in this case, things weren't really defined that Mr. Whiteside was dealing with, but this is a routine process,
yes,
obviously.
Sir.
So, I mean, you know what the steps are, they're defined, known, but why does it take that long? I mean, is it because they're not they're sequential, but you have to finish one? I don't quite understand.
Well, I mean, without going too deep into it, you submit your manuals, et cetera, to the FAA, and they have a review period where they go through them. And so the steps themselves are relatively straightforward, 1 to 10, let's just call it. But you get into, what they refer to as a lack of resources in certain FAA offices which you have to deal with. And again, they are being very helpful. I mean, we've had a really good relationship with the FAA. We've had a really good relationship with the DOT. But they are frankly hamstrung with resources, either a warm body to get in there and to be able to review and do these things. And just one example, when we launched this business, we were slap in the middle of sequester. And whether that was used improperly by some of the agencies we had to deal with, everyone throws their hands up and says, well, we're under sequester, we don't have the money, the resources we'll get to you when we can. And, I've got a lot of respect for the other gentlemen and ladies at the table with this new frontier, no pun intended, with space and drones, et cetera. And you're right, that's an issue of first impression. But airline certification, whether it be Part 135, Part 121, is not. And it should be relatively, I don't want to say you go to the store and pull one off the shelf,
right?
But it should be a little more
my time has expired, but I'm sorry the chairman left, but I would point out one of the deficiencies. You're talking again about certification, which we have heard from manufacturers, now we're hearing from you, is one of the most critical things that needs streamlining, reform, and it also needs adequate personnel. And in the chairman's version of privatization of air traffic control, certification stays over there with the government. The new corporation doesn't have that authority, and of course is subject to sequestration. You could create a government corporation where you wouldn't have that problem cleaving the agency in half, but that's for another day. Thank you, Mr.